Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. You know, today we're looking at something pretty interesting. We've got all these speeches and interviews from Canadian politicians responding to some of Trump's, uh, more controversial
Oh,
measures.
yeah, definitely. Like, it gets pretty heated at times.
It does, it does. It's like this clash of personalities and worldviews, but it also really brings out this strong sense of Canadian identity. I mean, you can just feel the pushback against some of Trump's rhetoric.
It's like they're saying, hey, we're not just going to sit back and take this.
Exactly. And to get a sense of all this, we'll be focusing on three specific politicians: Charlie Angus from the
Mm.
NDP, Elizabeth May from the Green Party, and Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP.
And each one kind of brings their own flavor to it, you know? Like,
Hmm.
Angus is fiery, May is witty, and Singh is, well, he's got that kind of lawyerly combativeness to him.
Yeah, good point. So let's start with Charlie Angus. This speech he gave on the House of Commons floor, it really caught people's attention, and not just because he was going after Trump, but it was the way he connected it to this bigger picture.
It was like he was tapping into this underlying anxiety that Canadians have about, being overshadowed by the U.S.
Right, and he even went back into history, bringing up examples like the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, and that whole refugee crisis with El Salvador.
To show that Canada has always tried to forge its own path, even when the U.S. is applying pressure.
Yeah, he was basically saying, look, we've stood up to you before and we'll do it again.
And then there was that whole thing about Trump eyeing up Canada's water resources.
Oh, yeah. Remember when Trump talked about Canada having that giant faucet? You could almost hear the collective gasp from Canadians.
It's like he was poking at one of their deepest fears, you know? This idea that the U.S. could just come in and take their natural resources.
And Angus really went after Canadian conservatives, too. He accused them of being fifth columnists, basically saying they were siding with Trump against Canada's interests.
Wow, yeah, that's a pretty loaded term. He wasn't holding back at all.
He even called them out for increasing spending on border security under Stephen Harper. It was like he was saying, so you're tough on security when it's politically convenient, but now you're aligning yourselves with someone who criticizes our border policies.
Hmm. Yeah, it does make you wonder about their strategy there.
But the interesting thing is that a lot of Canadians really seem to connect with Angus's message.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there were all these stories about people coming up to him on the street, thanking him for standing up to Trump. It's like he gave a voice to their anxieties.
It's one thing to disagree with someone's policies, but Angus was really going after Trump's character, too. He even called him out on social media, comparing him to a dictator, bringing up Putin in China. He was basically framing Trump as a threat to democracy on a global scale.
It was a bold move for sure,
Yeah.
but it clearly resonated with a lot of people. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about Elizabeth May and her response to Trump in the House of Commons. It was a totally different approach, but just as impactful.
Yeah, she went for the humor route, like using satire to expose the absurdity of some of the things Trump was saying about Canada.
Oh, yeah. Like when Trump suggested that Wayne Gretzky should run for prime minister. I mean,
Yeah.
talk about not understanding Canada's political system.
It was like he was saying, hey, why don't you just adopt our way of doing things? And May just turned it right back on him.
Right. And then she drops this bombshell. She says, hey, why don't we just let California, Oregon, and Washington join Canada?
Hmm.
Citing all the benefits like universal health care, gun control, abortion rights.
It was brilliant. She was basically saying, hey, if you're so unhappy with how things are going in the U.S., maybe you should join us.
And she even managed to sneak in a little dig at Trump's personality, saying that Canadians aren't boastful or bullies. They just want to be good neighbors and contribute to the world.
Subtle but effective.
Yeah, she really played it well.
Yeah.
So we've heard from the fiery Angus and the witty May. And next up, we've got Jagmeet Singh, who brings a whole other dimension to this conversation.
Yeah, he's got that interesting background in both law and martial arts. You can kind of see how that shapes his approach to dealing with someone like Trump. He just straight up called Trump an internet troll. It's like he was saying, look, I'm not going to play your games.
Yeah, he even compared dealing with Trump to dealing with bullies. Like standing up to them rather than backing down.
And he didn't just stop at criticism. He actually laid out some concrete steps for how Canada should respond, like challenging other Canadian leaders to hit back with retaliatory tariffs if Trump went ahead with his trade threats.
It was a pretty bold move,
Yeah.
essentially saying that Canada shouldn't be afraid to flex its muscles a bit.
Yeah, it definitely raises the question of how far a country like Canada should go in pushing back against its biggest trading partner. It's a tough balancing act for sure.
And then Singh shifted his focus to Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party. And, well, he didn't hold back on his criticism there either.
No, he really went after Poilievre's stance on healthcare, basically accusing him of wanting to privatize it and make it more like the system in the U.S.
He even brought up Poilievre's appearance on that Jordan Peterson podcast. Remember that?
Yeah, that's like a real lightning rod for people on both sides of the political spectrum.
Have
It's
you-
interesting that Singh brought it up, though. It's like he was drawing a direct line between Poilievre and this whole wave of right-wing populism that's been sweeping through the West.
And he was really hammering home this idea that Poilievre's policies would only benefit the wealthy at the expense of everyone else.
Yeah, it's kind of like what Angus was saying about Canadian conservatives aligning themselves with Trump's interests. They're both raising this alarm about a potential shift towards a more individualistic, less caring society.
And then Singh went even further and talked about this fear of a Maple MAGA movement emerging in Canada.
Oh, wow. So basically saying that Trump's brand of populism could take root up north, too. That's a scary thought for a lot of Canadians.
Yeah, but despite all that doom and gloom, Singh actually ended on a pretty optimistic note. He was like, we can beat this. We just need to come together and fight for our shared values.
It's a powerful message for sure. But it's also a tough sell when you've got figures like Elon Musk throwing their weight behind the other side.
Oh, yeah. Singh was not happy about Musk's support for Poilievre and the Conservatives. He even called it out as potential foreign interference in Canadian elections.
It just goes to show how complicated this whole thing is. You've got these tech billionaires with their global reach wading into domestic politics, and it's really blurring the lines.
And Singh really went after Musk, too, accusing him of being out of touch with the average person and only caring about protecting the interests of the wealthy elite.
It's a classic populist tactic, pitting the ordinary people against the elites.
And to top it all off, Singh also brought up these allegations about possible foreign interference in the Conservative Party itself. Something about Poilievre's leadership race and some security clearance documents that he refused to review.
Yeah, that definitely raises some eyebrows. It's like saying that there might be something fishy going on behind the scenes.
It all just goes to show how these political battles can get pretty messy and how everything is interconnected. What happens in the U.S. doesn't stay in the U.S. It spills over into other countries and influences their politics too.
It's like a ripple effect, And it forces countries like Canada to figure out how to navigate this increasingly complex world order.
So we've heard all these Canadian politicians taking aim at Trump. But did it actually make a difference? Did any of this really change anything?
Well, that's always a tricky question, how do you measure the impact of words? It's not always so clear-cut.
Right, but surely it had some kind of effect, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for one thing, it really helped to shape the narrative. Instead of just reacting to whatever Trump was saying, these politicians were taking control, defining Canadian values, and showing how different they were from Trump's America.
So it was more about setting the agenda than just playing defense.
Exactly. And they were also appealing to this deep sense of national pride. Like, hey, we're Canadians and we're not going to let anyone push us around.
You could even say that Trump actually ended up strengthening Canadian identity by giving them this common enemy to rally against.
That's an interesting thought. Like, sometimes having an outside threat can actually bring people together.
But what about the relationship between Canada and the U.S.? Did all this tough talk do any lasting damage?
Well, diplomacy is all about finding that balance between being firm and being tactful. I think these Canadian politicians did a pretty good job of walking that line.
So they were willing to stand up for their principles, but they also knew they couldn't completely alienate their biggest trading partner.
Right. And it's important to remember that not everyone in Canada agreed with how they handled it. Some people thought they were too harsh on Trump and that it could backfire.
Which brings us to another question. Did all of this actually unify Canadians, or did it just create more division?
It's probably a bit of both, to be honest. On the one hand, it definitely brought a lot of Canadians together around this idea of we're in this together.
But on the other hand, it might have pushed away people who were more sympathetic to Trump, or who thought that Canada should have just kept a low profile.
It just goes to show how complicated politics can be. Even when it seems like everyone's on the same page, there are always these underlying tensions and disagreements.
And that's a good reminder for all of us, right? To try to see things from different perspectives and not just buy into easy answers.
Exactly. The world is rarely black and white.
Well said. So that wraps up our deep dive into how Canadian politicians responded to the Trump era. It's been a fascinating journey exploring international relations, political strategy, and the power of national identity.
And it reminds us that politics is about so much more than just policies and elections. It's about values, identities, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and where we fit in the world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you learned something new and that it sparked some interesting thoughts. And we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of ideas.